in 2012, I found a lump on my breast. And so I didn't get it. I got it checked twice. The first time it didn't get diagnosed correctly. And so 6 months later, it was like twice as big. And so I went back. And so then they finally gave me a mammogram. They said at the time I was too young. I was 33 when I first found that lump.
Wow.
And so, so then I got diagnosed. At that time I had 2 children. The first one was 12 and the other one was 6. And so, so I went through chemotherapy and surgery and radiation and all that initial treatment. And then afterwards, I got done and they put me on tamoxifen because it was HER2 positive, or not HER2 positive, estrogen and progesterone positive and HER2 negative cancer. And so they put me on tamoxifen, and I've been on tamoxifen ever since, so since about 2013. And but at that time, I also had other friends who I had met through the young adult cancer survivor group, and everybody was talking about nutrition and about ways that we can prevent cancer recurrence or heal cancer, or not heal cancer, but like kind of eat anti-cancer things. And then I had a friend of mine who became metastatic, and I started thinking about, okay, how can I think more about a diet that's anti-cancer? And so at that time, I started doing all of this research. It was probably to the detriment of trying to actually do my PhD research. I was like looking up stuff left and right, like all of them for days. And so I came across all this research about broccoli sprouts and about sulforaphane. And so about how it's so promising that they have so many anti-cancer properties and so many different mechanisms of action within just that single type of chemical, which is the phytochemical in broccoli sprouts. And so I was like, okay, how am I going to grow these things? And so they were like, oh, just sprout them. You can buy sprouters, you can grow them in jars, you can do these things. And so I tried. I bought a sprouter, one of these kind of like stacking sprouter things, and then I tried growing them in jars. And it didn't seem like anything that I did worked well. Instead, I got like, instead of getting sprouts that looked beautiful, like in the pictures that you see, I got these slimy, smelly things. And it was a lot of work to get the slimy, smelly things. And so I was like picking out the worst of it and seeing if I could actually eat the stuff that wasn't horrible. And so I was thinking like, this isn't working well. And so I started thinking about trying to grow them in some sort of medium. And so like soil or something like that. And I think I got the idea because I went to the co-op and I saw that they had these little tiny containers and they had like all these sprouts, you know, like when you go to Petco or something like that and you see all the catnip growing and the like cat grass and it's growing in these little containers. Well, the same thing was happening at the co-op here. And so I went there and then I saw this like lush green and there was like broccoli sprouts on there. And I was like, oh, that's not hard. I can do that. Like, and because I saw that they had some sort of like substrate on the bottom. So then I started putting them in trays and growing them in soil and like doing all these things. And in the end, after like much experimentation, I came up with this cupcake tray method from the dollar store. So this method of mine worked really well because all I had to do was put the seeds in a substrate and then put a cap on it and then leave it until they grew. And so then I just take the cap off and eat them. One of my friends who's a plant breeder, he was like, well, I have hundreds of pounds of broccoli seed and you can just have it. And I was like, what is this? It turns out he had all this broccoli seed that he was trying to sell to farmers. He had it produced and the trials that he was banking on doing so well failed in the second year. 1 pound for me is enough for like a year. And so I had 40 pounds, so I started giving it away. So I made a tray of sprouts using some sprouts from, or using some seeds from the co-op. And so we went and tested it. The co-op seeds versus the Cascadia, which is the cultivar that you guys have now, Cascadia had 80 times more of the precursor to sulforaphane. So first off, what I do is technically called a microgreen. And so I wanted to be like actually technically correct, because a sprout is the thing that you would grow in the jars, and they're only a few days old when you eat them. And so they're younger and they haven't started photosynthesizing. But a microgreen is something that is basically a slightly older sprout, but it hasn't grown its second set of leaves yet. So it's still got its seed leaves. What's so great about broccoli seedlings? Broccoli seedlings have what's called phytochemicals, which are just basically chemicals made by plants to fight off bacteria, fungi, insects, and other herbivores. So if you think about the fact that a seed is basically like a packed lunch for a plant, well, they also packed like insecticide. They're like, here, take some bug spray, right? Or something like that, so that they can survive without being eaten or being killed. And so that's what a phytochemical is. So it's already got a biological basis because it's trying to fight off something else. And so sulforaphane is just one of like a whole spectrum of different types of phytochemicals that are found in cruciferous vegetables. And when we're talking about cruciferous vegetables, we're talking about things in the Brassicaceae family. So things like kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, stuff like that, and broccoli. There have been thousands of studies now on sulforaphane. When I first started looking at this, there were just like 100, and they've just exploded everywhere because it's so promising. And so the different health benefits of sulforaphane include that they're an antioxidant, they're anti-inflammatory, they're anti-mutagenic, anti-cancer, they decrease insulin resistance, or at least it's been shown in laboratory to have decreased insulin resistance. They actually even remove air pollutants from the body. They're neuroprotective, also seem to enhance the immune system. Okay, so from the anti-cancer perspective, what we're interested in is that it suppresses the inflammation that triggers and fuels tumor development. They arrest the cell cycle of cancer cells and cause cell death. And they inhibit the formation of blood vessels in tumors. And they inhibit metastasis as well. And so most of these are done in mouse and rat studies. But there are some studies to show, I think like Andrea was saying, that they do work in humans. So there's a lot of these mechanisms, super promising. Okay, so how do we get this sulforaphane? Okay, so basically, if you eat raw or minimally cooked cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cabbage, or kale, you're gonna get sulforaphane. But the highest concentrations they've found so far are in broccoli seedlings or sprouts. And so actually the highest concentration is in the seed. So if you're looking at this graph over here, you can see that the super high concentrations are in the seed, right? But you can't eat that seed. The seed has this fat in it called urushic acid, which causes heart disease. So if you eat too much seed, then it could actually hurt you. But that fat is transformed into other things when the seedling sprouts, when it germinates. And so then it still has a high amount of the sulforaphane precursor and sulforaphane in it, but it doesn't have that urushic acid, so it's safe to eat once it's sprouted. And so 1 cup of sprouts is equal to about 50 cups of broccoli, the adult broccoli. So this is a little bit of the mechanism of how sulforaphane is formed, and it's important. Sulforaphane is not what the broccoli actually has inside of it, or the broccoli seed. What the broccoli seed is holding and the seedlings are holding is this thing called glucoraphanin. It's the precursor, and it doesn't turn into sulforaphane until you damage the seedling. So you have to crush some of the cells, like when you chew on it or you cut it, because that releases an enzyme called myrosinase. And I believe it's because the plant is trying to defend itself. And so it releases this myrosinase, which turns that glucoraphanin into sulforaphane. Sulforaphane itself is not very stable. It breaks down fast. So that's the reason why the plant stores it as something else. Glucoraphanin is your stable precursor. So you release that myrosinase enzyme, it converts the precursor to sulforaphane. So are all broccoli varieties the same? And remember I was saying that there's the variety that you have, which is called the Cascadia variety. And so that Cascadia variety has 80 times the amount that I found in a retail seed in a co-op near our home. And so this was the retail seed in terms of the amount of glucoraphanin, which is the precursor, which is what they tested for, not sulforaphane directly. And so then that you can see that I actually did a little experiment with this one. So I had a tray that was just the seedlings with water, and then I had a tray with some sulfur fertilizer to see if I could increase the amount of sulforaphane in the seedlings when I did it, but it didn't change anything. So how do we make these things? Make about an inch or an inch and a half layer of coconut coir across the bottom. You add the coir to the tray, okay? And then you put the tray in a sink on top of something. Put another container underneath it so that the holes drain out. Hopefully your coir is not very wet yet when you're putting it in. So you put it on top of something in the sink, like another container in the sink to hold it up, but make that container a little smaller than, or allow the holes to drain out of the bottom. And then go ahead and pour water on the top. I use a little sprayer attachment on my sink. And then I shake gently the tray to get that coir to settle out evenly as it drains, to be like nice and flat, to get that top part to even out so that it's not all bumpy, because you'll notice that sometimes it gets lumpy and bumpy. You can rinse your seeds out. So put them in the strainer and then rinse them with clean water. Okay. And try to do as much as you can to get all that vinegar off. So now you're going to apply the seeds to the tray. You've got that 2 tablespoons of vinegar, 15 minutes. You strain the seeds, you rinsed it. So all you really have to do is then dump the seeds onto the coir and take something and smooth it out. Don't use your finger because it sticks to your finger a lot. So I would take like a butter knife or something and just kind of gently spread it across the surface. Don't push it in. Just make it as even as you can across the surface. If you got that part done, all you have to do is put the lid on the tray. Do not put them in direct sunlight. You can put them in a windowsill that gets indirect sunlight. Keep it cool. You know, broccoli tends to be like a colder weather plant, like broccoli and lettuces and stuff like that. And so they prefer it if they're cool. And so, yeah, put them out of the way somewhere and put something underneath it because it'll drain that brown stuff from the coir. And so you don't want to put it on something that it can stain. And then just leave it, basically. And check on it now and then, but I mean, you don't really even have to do that. I just leave it and look at it through the little dome most of the time and just say like, oh, growing, not growing, okay. When it hits the top of the dome, let's see, do I have a slide for that? So you just let the seedlings grow, keep them cool out of direct sunlight. Okay, so after about a week, the tallest ones will touch the lid. At which point you could just take the lid off and start eating them. So they're like 2 inches tall. That's my, so you take that lid off, you remove the lid. So if you want to eat the seedlings, in regular sprouts, when you make them in a jar, you would eat the roots too. In microgreens, you normally don't eat the roots.
Okay.
So what I would do is take a pair of scissors and I just basically mow them down and like just cut them. And then I put the cuttings in a strainer and I strain out any seed hulls or any broccoli coir that just happens to come with it. But I don't pull the whole thing up by the roots. I just cut off the top part. Usually if you have a couple trays, it's helpful because you can have one tray already started, and when you finish the tray, then you'll have another batch already. Otherwise you have to wait between trays for the next tray. And so usually what happens is I throw out the coconut coir, I compost it after I'm done with it. And then with these trays, I throw them in the dishwasher. So they're dishwasher safe. And so then it sanitizes it and I just start over again. And so usually if you stagger like every 3 or 4 days, depending on how much you eat, like I can eat maybe about 1/6 of a tray when it's full every day. For me, that's enough. But we don't cook them.
Okay.
So because that would kill the myrosinase, which is the enzyme that you need to create the sulforaphane from the precursor. So you need to like eat it raw or close to raw. And so they taste a little peppery. And so they're not as like bland as bean sprouts or something. My recommendation is that you eat it with something else, because eating them by themselves, it's a little bit strong. You could throw them in a smoothie too.
Can you juice them?
Yeah, you can juice them as well. But the only thing about juicing is that it creates all of that. It just squeezes out the juice. And so and so I'm not really sure in terms of like how much of it left in the part that actually comes out the other end, you know, the part you throw into the compost later. Like, so if I'm talking about how much are you absorbing, I'm not sure.
It's probably better to, for the purpose of getting maximum sulforaphane, it's probably better to not juice them, I think.
But one of the things that I used to do is I used to take the lid off and put them out to, I'd be like, okay, go photosynthesize and like get all those photosynthetic chemicals and things like that. But then there's so little soil in there that they dry out very quickly. So, and then also if they get too tall and too thick in the center in particular of the tray, they don't give enough air. And so then they end up rotting out. You get damping off in the center. And so once they get to a certain height, you should just eat them. and don't let them grow too tall and thick, because they can be like really dense in the center, and then they don't get enough air, and that's not good for them either. So something that I do, because I cannot eat a ton of broccoli sprouts, I also take supplements on top of that. So a broccoli sprout supplement or sulforaphane supplements usually contain the precursor because it's shelf stable and not the sulforaphane. And so they're usually broccoli seed extracts. And remember when I said that it had that oil in it, the erucic acid in it before? So they remove the erucic acid and they just concentrate the glucosinolate or the glucoraphanin precursor. So the pills need myrosinase to make the sulforaphane in your body. Your body will make, makes some myrosinase a little bit, your gut flora, so your gut bacteria do make some of that enzyme, but it's a very small amount. And so you can transform a little bit of what you eat in the pill form into sulforaphane, but it's very small by comparison. So what you need to do is, if you're going to get a supplement, some supplements actually include some myrosinase in them and others don't. So if you're going to buy a supplement, it's probably best to buy the ones that say that they have myrosinase, right? However, if you don't have a supplement that has myrosinase in it, you can also add myrosinase either by eating them with sprouts or taking some mustard powder or horseradish. I've heard that they have it too, like fresh horseradish and ground up mustard powder. So what I do is I eat both the sprouts plus the supplement to increase my dosage, so I don't have to eat a ton of sprouts. So normally they say, you know, for cancer prevention, eating a cup of sprouts a day is good for a dosage, right? But I want more, so I eat a cup of sprouts plus supplements, and they've actually done research to show that eating sprouts plus having the supplement increases the amount that you absorb from the supplement. This is what I've been using for many years. The Brocomax, and it says it's myrosinase activated. You can see that there's that little the supplement facts here, and it tells you that it's in glucosinolate form, which is the precursor to sulforaphane. Right? It tells you to take 2 capsules. I usually take 3 with some sprouts. One of these jars, like the 60 gel cap jars, like $35, $40, something like that. Then I've recently started using this as well. So I have Athmacol that has my Rosamax in it. There are some results of tests of how much sulforaphane is in these lab tests, and they were posted by this company, Brock. And so Brock is advertising that they have shelf-stable sulforaphane. So they don't use the precursor, they just give you the sulforaphane and it's shelf-stable. They do have research studies to show that it is sulforaphane. The funny thing is that Brock actually does tests of their competitors and posts it on their website. And so I looked up their competitors, and this is not bad. It's not as good as, you know, what they're saying, and Athmacol is not bad either. So Brock is the most expensive of them. I think this one jar of 60 tablets or something like that is like $65. So, you know, if you can get the same dosage cheaper just by taking sprouts and eating something else, maybe that's better. So the Quar doesn't seem to go bad. I kept it for like a year, and because it's just carbon, and it does, you could just keep it. I don't keep it wet. I just keep it damp, right?
Okay.
And then I just put a lid over the top of it, and I put it in my garage. and it just stays like that. And so I just scoop it out when I need it. So let's see. Okay, useful tips. Right, this is what I learned from teaching to my cancer survivor group, is that one time I had a friend of mine who threw out her entire tray because she saw these little white fuzzy things coming out of the seeds and she thought it was a fungus. So there are root hairs that will come out of your seeds. So the root hairs are just basically the hairs on the root that are trying to increase the surface area so they can absorb water and nutrients, so they can set up shop and do the things. So it's natural to have root hairs on your roots. You normally don't see them when you bury them in the ground because they're going into the soil. But since you spread everything out on the surface, you're going to see them when they first come out. But they will go down into the core eventually. Right? But first you'll see these little white fuzzy things. They look like this. Right? And so if you see them and they're not like all, if you know what mold looks like mold is all puffy and fibrous and it has little black dots in it and stuff like that when it's like the bad mold. If it's just nice white fluffy stuff coming out of just the seed thing, that's not mold. Right? So just leave the lid on and just leave them alone. They'll be fine. Like I said before, if they grow too long and thick, they start to rot, especially out of the middle of the tray.
Yeah.
I have a friend of mine who has some problems with her coir. I have never had problems with the coir myself, but she does this too. And she says she thinks that the coir itself is causing a problem sometimes, but she sprays it with a 1 to 10 water peroxide. What is that? Mix solution, yeah. And then she doesn't have any problems with that. If that happens, just know there's that potential solution. And she said maybe it's because she stored her coir outside. And I have stored coir outside because my husband gets upset because I take up so much space in the garage. But it's always covered. Just imagine it's like potting soil. You would just put it in a container and close the lid on it and it's fine.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to stay moist even, because you can moisten it again later. It just has to be, soft enough that you can scoop it out when you need it.
Okay.
And then, stagger your trays so you don't run out, have more than one. And that's helpful to me to do that. Usually when I start when I start eating one tray, then I plant the next tray, because it takes me about a week to eat through an entire tray, especially because at first they look real sparse and you're like, I'm going to finish this tray in like 3 days. But then in the next 3 days, they grow and get thicker, and so then it gets harder and harder to eat through the whole tray as the tray gets thicker and thicker. But I do mix them with everything. I mix them with lasagna. I just throw sprouts in lasagna. I just try to make sure it's not too hot. I've thrown sprouts in clam chowder, and it doesn't seem right not to have them in there, because I'm so used to it at this point. A cup a day is usually what they which is a lot, actually. It's a lot of sprouts. So I never actually eat that much, but that's what they said was 100 grams is as the dosage that they use in studies. I take supplements on top of it so that I don't have to worry too much about exactly how much I'm eating.